Hello, my name is Paladin, and I wanted to give a little preface to this video before you watched it. Now, this is a very intricate deep dive into one out of the 6 major pillars that I've identified for being able to run a West Marches really well. And so that does mean that I'm going to be talking about one topic to an extreme depth. And so this is a video that I made targeted for professional GMs in order to help them get started on their process of being able to run a really great and amazing West March to a professional level, which takes an extreme amount of understanding and skill in order to successfully do that. Now, this is a very long video. This will help anybody wanting to try to start a West March to understand the very niche and deep topics and various things that go along with making a West March amazing. This video is something that will help anybody on their journey of making a West Marches. Please leave a comment if you felt like this was amazing, or if you have any feedback for how I can improve for further videos. Hope you have a great and wonderful day, and I hope that you enjoy the video. Have a good one. As what we're going to do today, we're going to start off with the core principles. Now, you guys already kind of have a gist of what West Marches are from like the last time that we did the SPG webinar. I think that kind of gave a good like overall representation of what a West March is, but it didn't really go into like a lot of extreme depth of every single one of the systems or how to get it set up or ways on how to do it or why to do it one way versus the other, and like when to know when to switch up or down based on what is going on with the West March. So today is going to be a lot more of that, kind of going into that extreme detail of each major pillar, and then giving you guys a lot of options on what you possibly could add, and then giving you some templates so that you can start to get your framework set up for everything. So you have something to start with, and then you can build from there. But as far as the first part goes, some common pitfalls that kind of come around whenever it comes to West Marches is that there are a lot of West Marches that I see that lack a lot of clear systems. And that even is on the free side. Even the ones that are many thousands big or hundreds big, sometimes they just have no structure for some of the various elements. For example, like note keeping, there could be a lot of player communication that is chaotic, or maybe information is kind of kept sporadically, and it can be very hard to find things. Or maybe there's like no structure for like session scheduling, or like how to do certain things, like what happens if your character levels up, or some basic understanding of introducing like what a West March is, or maybe there could sometimes be misinformation about the various definitions. So that's one of the main things that a lot of West Marches suffer from, and it tends to be like a very big ongoing problem, at least to some degree. And so another pitfall that I see West Marches have a lot is that they tend to have like very poor onboarding. And so people that are very new to West Marches, they don't really know what the aspect of that is. And so that brings a lot of problems with like what to expect, what to do, and also how to interact with everything, even the playstyle itself. It also makes recruiting very hard as well. So trying to like circumvent those barriers is possible, but it has to be done in a slightly creative and different way, which I'll explain more how to do that later. Inconsistent scheduling is another part that I see a lot of West Marches kind of tend to suffer from, like not having a very clear process, or maybe scheduling a session is very frustrating and overwhelming, and it's very taxing. And so I see systems that are very extensive, and I see some that are like not extensive enough. So there has to be like some sort of medium for that. Another pitfall is like having very low investment. So I know that Avex, you were talking about engagement. So engagement is one of the biggest problems whenever it comes to ongoing West Marches. After about the second or third week, that's whenever there's like the biggest drop in engagement from players. And so it's about that time whenever there needs to be like new engagement strategies to put in. So we'll talk about like different engagement strategies that you can implement and having a framework of when to do what. And then the last thing is GM burnout. So there are a lot of GMs that I've seen in West Marches that tend to put a lot of admin work on themselves. They try to manually do a lot of the work rather than using automated systems. And so I do see a lot of campaigns kind of burning out from exhaustion, or maybe just trying to do a little bit too much for themselves rather than just kind of taking it one step at a time. And so I think that one word of caution, like even with this webinar and workshop, is even though I'm kind of giving you all the tools, just kind of be mindful that you're not meant to use all of them at the same time from the start, because you don't want to overwhelm yourself. You also don't want to overwhelm your players either. So we'll kind of like come up with a strategy on how you're going to implement these as you go during the various stages that West Marches grow. Now, as far as like the core management systems, there's mainly six. Information and notes, we already kind of talked about that, like being able to track information and track it well and trying to have it be accurate, especially between GMs and players. Session scheduling and logistics, like how to schedule sessions with players and GMs. Onboarding is a huge part of what's going to basically make the basis of keeping your West March growing and also keeping it together, especially at the start. Player engagement and motivation strategies is another thing, like how to keep players from leaving, essentially, how to keep them engaged and how to keep them there, keep them coming back. Other stuff includes as well being able to, what's it called? Create content and then also implementing that content as well. So that way you're not putting too much on yourself, but also you know when to put content and also what kind of content to make based on what the players want. And then the last thing is going to be for being able to put all of this together and put it through one single location and being able to have like a hub for all of your information. So that way you're not having everything be scattered and it makes sense for what you want. So, but for today, we're really going to cover like 2 or 3 of those. And we're not going to go too far in depth into some of the other things. Also, although we're probably going to want to, but we're going to go into really, really extreme detail whenever it comes into content creation and implementation strategies, and also when it comes to information management, because those two kind of go hand in hand to some degree. Now, as far as what to start with, this is going to be the first part of like the interactive document, is to kind of get an idea of what it is that you are wanting as far as the West March. And if you haven't really given it much thought, that's okay. So what I want you guys to do is to take a moment to write down one sentence or vision statement that describes maybe what you want your West March campaign to be. And so it's going to really typically be 2 parts. The first part is the world's theme and tone and core concept. And the second part is going to be like a main driver mechanic. It's like what motivates players to engage with the setting. And so some examples would be like a high sea sandbox where factions battle for control of mystical archipelago.
If we have a tick there, what are the good like drivers for a campaign, would you say? Or what's a good way to summarize that? That's what I'm thinking about.
When it comes to like player wants, I mean, it has to be something that gives them a lot of challenge, but also forces them to stay together. Like having a very high lethal or dangerous environment tends to be very good. If you want to have a lot of story or roleplay elements, having towns and cities be very far apart tends to be like a very good thing. Really, having a lot of wilderness is a lot of what makes it
for sure.
Makes it good. And now, when it comes to like drivers of like what's going to motivate them to go out there, it's having an environment that is largely unexplored, that has a lot of mystery, like clues, things that are like a little bit unknown. And so like one of the things that I do in my West Marches is like called like pocket lethals, or like pockets of like lethalities that are a bit higher than the area. So they might go into a dungeon and see that there's one part that's a lot higher in danger than the rest of the dungeon. So that way they have something to come back to later, or having that be a part of like a region or a city as well. So that kind of keeps the intrigue a lot higher. Having multiple things that are kind of scattered across each other, like for clues, like you need to get several clues to kind of get past this one location, or finding that some dungeons are hidden unless you get certain clues. Stuff like that kind of keeps them wanting to keep coming back and keep finding out stuff. And
treasure hunting stuff. I think that, I want to work all that in there.
Yeah.
And I'm putting something out there to be like, I'm going to want them to protect this, and hopefully they go along with that. But
absolutely,
again, getting that investment is a tricky part. But
yeah, absolutely.
It sounds like part of the game is to poke at that inner completionist over there, where they're like, you just kind of throw out those things and they're like, oh, this is one of 4, huh? Well, there's 9 other things that we're working on, but now I have this thing we're collecting 4 things, and so I can see where that kind of driver, kind of getting everyone, like the players getting together, like, oh, we want to do quest G, and do that.
It's kind of like a combination between, there's a little bit of like a completionist aspect, but also like competition between each other as players to like try to find out more of the world as possible. Like that's also like another like passive driver that kind of goes on in the background.
So is there like, how does the communication of the world kind of happen? So like if, like say a player is like very motivated by that, they want to explore the Eastern Jungle Temple, right? They want to be the one that kind of discovers that. If they go do that, then does the main chat somewhere have like, oh, here's what we know about the temple, thanks to so and so, or because it sounds like there's a little bit of ego kind of like feeding in that, like you say, oh, this is the explorer and they get credit for this sort of thing. Does that kind of come into play, or
It depends. Like in terms of information sharing, it really just depends on how extensive your systems are set up already.
Yeah.
We can kind of cover that, I guess, in a lot more depth later. But as far as like
okay,
what's going to get them to want to talk with each other, it's going to be things like having it be necessary that maybe all the information is not gatherable from one location. So you can't get everything that you need to get past a certain obstacle unless you are going across several different other locations. So then it kind of becomes harder for one group to really do everything, because then it would take like years as opposed to weeks or months. So that's another aspect of it. It's like a necessity of needing information, or maybe a necessity of needing like specific skills or different types of classes to get past an obstacle. That's also another thing I've seen. But Avix, are you done with your portion?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good when you're ready.
Yeah, go ahead.
Essentially, the vision for mine is due to a ritual in this one particular plane, the gods across the multiverse are dying, and the players are essentially sucked from their realm into ground zero.
Okay, that's pretty good.
Which is a very brutal place.
I can imagine. Yeah, it sounds very brutal. I mean, brutal is good.
It's essentially go find what happened and fix it. Or figure out your own thing along the way.
Gotcha. So there's like a need to like fix this problem, or else basically everyone dies. Essentially.
I mean, on ground zero, civilization is basically hello, little tiny villages, goodbye, cities.
Okay. All right. So now that we got a kind of have like a general idea what we want to do, now the next part will become a lot easier. So this is the part where we're going to create a content creation strategy and also how to implement that content as well. I think this is where a lot of West Marches, they kind of tend to either forego this step to just kind of wing it, or they kind of realize that they end up doing way too much, and then they're like way in over the head with too much stuff to make, or unsure what to do next, or how exactly to create content in a way that's adaptive to what the players want and what it is that they're wanting to do going forward to kind of keep them engaged. So this part is going to cover stuff like long-term content planning and strategy, adaptive content creation, like kind of staying flexible as well. You don't want to paint yourself into a corner. How to keep player engagement over time, maintaining the world consistency while also having things evolve, how to leverage a community and getting their input, and also tools and systems for ongoing content distribution. And so then we'll go into like how like you choosing your long-term content strategy again as an exercise. But to kind of start from the beginning, long-term content planning and strategy. So what is it? So long-term content planning is the foundation of most West Marches. It's unlike traditional campaigns, like they follow a linear path, right? But in a living, breathing world, you kind of have multiple aspects that you can go. And it's good to have multiple pathways. So that way you have groups that aren't just kind of stuck on one path. And so having multiple directions that people can go and then having them kind of coalesce at some point is typically the way that most West Marches tend to come about. And then as far as like why to make a long-term content plan, I mean, it's very extensively difficult to try to plan things on the fly. Like if you start to get a West March together and then don't make a content plan, you might be good starting out with like one zone, but then as people start to like split off in interests, it'll be like you have a lot of like semi washed down ideas that just kind of don't go anywhere, and then the engagement drops and it kind of dies. And so that's what ends up happening. And so having like things like templates and regions kind of like preset up kind of helps out a lot, and also knowing how to move something from one area to another. If like maybe you had planned this giant region, but then it never kind of gets explored, how you can switch it to be something different if they plan to go a different direction. So that way your work isn't necessarily wasted. And so something that I saw that helped with this kind of planning is to make tiered region development. So imagine you get out a map, right? And you draw your different regions. Being able to go through and being able to divide the different geographical regions by level, like levels 1 through 4 or levels 5 through 10, and also by how dangerous they are. So maybe like a number system, like 1 through 10. So it could be, or maybe like a color system. Like you can also use a color system as well. So it could be something like this forest area is level 1. You can mark it red for being very difficult in relation to what a level 1 party would have. And so that could be an example of how to like visually kind of distribute your tiers, so that way you kind of see more or less what exactly your direction of how the West March is going to go. And so what I mean with this is that whenever, like game development wise, if you are setting up your regions to be next to each other, players are going to bump up against things that are going to be slightly harder than what they're used to, but then they're going to bounce back because it's going to be like a soft barrier, but they can't get past. So it's like you're setting up some borders of what it is that they have to essentially try to get through or overcome eventually to get to deeper regions for West Marches. And so that could be set up either like literally region by region, or you can even like subdivide the regions into areas. So that way you can see more or less where they're going to be funneling throughout the adventure, more or less. And so that's whenever you kind of create your pathways. And so whenever I make pathways for West Marches, I try to do 3 because I tend to run with 20, but trying to do one pathway for every 10 people is about a good amount of like scaling for a West March. And so I'll start by basically making my regions, and then I'll start to put the areas down, and then I will start to like basically make a line of where it is that I'm intending players to kind of go more or less. So that's how I make my West Marches. And so that's called making like a thread. Like you're making these different threads of how you're expecting people to go. And along with that thread, you're making a like a storyline that kind of goes along with going in that particular adventure. So if they're going like path A, for example, maybe it's like 3 to 5 quests on how to awaken a dragon and maybe like stop a war that's going on with the kingdom over on that side. But if you go on path B, maybe it's like the kingdom itself being affected by the dragon. And so one way or the other, there has to be something that's relating to each other between path A and path B. Otherwise, the people in the West Marches are not going to have any sort of idea what's going on with one or the other group. So it kind of has to be related to some extent, whether it's in the same region or in the same area. So that's one way that I've seen West Marches do stuff. Some other elements that also would be very, very great to kind of keep in mind, things like calendars. So not everyone uses calendars, but if you had like some real-time events that are occurring, for example, you might have like an actual date that, okay, like you have until this specific date to kind of get this main goal done. Otherwise, this consequence will follow. And then that kind of pushes people with a little bit of pressure to kind of get moving along. So that way they don't just like stop and just kind of like drag their feet. It also forces them to interact a lot more if they have some back pressure going behind them. Other things include, I would, like ahead of time, I would make something called a point of interest database. This could also be like an area. It's like a catalog of like locations, like small locations that are very small and secular, like a wizard's tower or like a swamp or like a small mini dungeon, NPCs, secrets, rumors. So that way you have like a catalog of options that if you get into like a situation in the West March where you realize like, I need a little bit more of something, you can draw from a like cookie cutter presets database to kind of like insert stuff into your game. That way you kind of can keep it interesting while also developing the game in the way that you kind of want it to. This could also include like encounter tables as well if you wanted to. You can make those specific to different types of areas as well. And you can also have like explicit connections between different locations and NPCs. So that way your world still feels like it's together to some extent. Other stuff that I've seen for implementing these kind of different parts of content is I've seen something called like a content matrix. And so that's whenever you track which areas are explored versus unexplored. I think one of the biggest blind spots that I've seen with GMs is knowing like player facing what it is that they know versus because naturally GMs know a lot more than the players. And trying to kind of like keep hush about certain things can be kind of hard, especially if you have multiple groups. So having things that, hello, Jabugi. So having things that kind of like help you understand what it is that you know versus they know versus like group 1, 2, 3, like what do they know about each region? So something that I use is that I color code my different regions, and then I have like a number between 1 and 10 of how well people know that region as a whole, and then also I have a number between 1 and 10 for how much interest they even have for that region. So if I see that they're constantly talking about like, hey, we want to go to the Dairylands, but they don't care anything at all about going to the Mountain of Pain, then I kind of know like, okay, maybe I should put more of my attention over to the Dairylands so that way I can make sure that they have everything that they need rather than me working on the wrong thing. And then I put all of my attention on the Mountain of Pain but they're over here in like the Dairylands, right? So then it doesn't really help with engagement if I'm doing what it is that I think I need to do versus what they want to do. And so it's kind of looking through the realm of like tracking interest, but also prioritizing your development in regards to like what it is that the players want. Other things for implementation are like discovery triggers. And so kind of like I was mentioning before, like let's say that there are most likely going to be things in your world that are not known. There might be some places that are known. Like if you go to a town, they'll probably be like, yeah, there's a dungeon over that way. There's these general things going on. But things that are like hidden and forgotten are also things that can be discovered. And so maybe like finding an ancient map in a library might reveal like a completely different region or a completely different dungeon. So that kind of gives a little bit more discoverability to your world, so that not everything is completely findable just by traversing the map. And so those kind of things really help with understanding what it is that you are wanting to showcase to the players. But then also you're creating this like network of things that they can find out, which reveals more stuff over time. And so you also can like hard like case that where like you can make it a hard barrier that you can't get to the next region without finding out all these previous things about this location first. It could be good to do that, but it could also be very bad, especially if they don't like the region in particular. So if you kind of get into a situation where they don't want to stay here for very long, you can like skip ahead to the next region as long as you have it prepared. Other things that I've seen used, campaign phases. Like with D&D, there's a lot of like local heroes versus regional heroes versus both threats. You can make distinct campaign phases along with these levels. However, the one thing that's kind of like counterintuitive to that is if you have a West Marches that is of different levels, like they're not all the same level, you're going to run into problems where like, well, we have a phase 1 group over here and a phase 2 group over here, but they don't really interact. So then you get a lot of conflict between that. So it doesn't really work for a West March with different levels. Other implementation tools you could also use is like a phase calendar. So that's what I use. So I introduce a specific set of content every 2 to 3 months. And whenever I do that, I make sure to include the players in that planning as much as I can. And so it could be something like, okay, like guys, like I see that you all are wanting to go in this general direction. So I'm going to give you guys a couple of options of what I thought of, and you guys can put in your ideas of maybe some things that you would want to do. But I want to make sure to make the content that you guys want, so that whenever you get to that point, you have the areas and the regions that you are basically most interested in. So it's kind of like this conversation of like the players being able to give their input on what they want to do, but kind of being fair to like the majority as well. So they get some chance to like do polling and give their opinion on various things. So as far as like practicality, so like at first you're going to be, you're most likely going to be developing this, of course, before the players get a chance to play. And so then it's a question of like, well, like how much and what exactly are you preparing before getting the players introduced, right? Like what are you making ahead of time? And so what I do is I develop what I call an unseen world. Basically, it's like what happens if the players didn't exist? What are the areas or the regions that are available to go through? And what is like the major timeline of events of what maybe could happen from beginning to end, regardless if the players existed or not. And so that way you have like a baseline idea of what it is that your trajectory is, or what it is that you're intending the default direction for things to kind of go. And I wouldn't plan that more than 2 or 3 months out, which is like, what, like if you have 3 groups, that'd be about like, let's see, 3, 4, 12, like 36 sessions at most, maybe, with like 2 or 3 different pathways. So that kind of sets you down like an idea of like, okay, if you plan things out 2 or 3 months at a time, and then you kind of create that content, and then you start, well, now you are at a point where you have all of the baseline things made, but then you're also kind of like keeping a good eye on what it is that the players are interested in, and you're kind of making things along the path of what it is they want to explore more. But then you also have time for you to set up the next region as well, which takes time, especially if you're trying to make things like clues and like nested dungeons with like different sort of rumors and stuff. So that takes a lot of planning and forethought, and it could take like I would say like about a month or two to make that sort of content. But as far as like how much to prepare, I kind of more or less will work along like a 70%, 30% strategy. So like having 70% of your content made in advance and then leaving 30% unplanned. So that way, if the players are coming in, there's still some capability to adapt and change things around. Okay, I'll take a little pause there, but I'll get your guys' thoughts on what you think before I kind of go into the next part of this same section. If you guys have any questions or input on any of that.
No, it's great. I'm being quiet. I'm taking notes and stuff over here. It's good.
You're good? Okay.
And I'm scrolling through this document as well, which has a lot of good templates.
I'm just also listening in the background and taking notes.
Hopefully it's not too loud. I'm not banging on the keyboard too loud as I go.
I like the sound of like keyboard clacking. I have a mechanical keyboard as well because it's a very loud click. I like that sound. But feel free to like just interrupt with questions. Like even if I'm mid talking, like I'm okay with like, hey, like I got a question about this or that.
Oh, okay, cool. So one of the things is I'm kind of curious about with this is that because I think one of the things I do with a lot of my tables, and this is a different scale, is that they kind of get a little excited about some stuff, and I kind of make it up as I go. Like my Saltmarsh crew, they decided they didn't want to go back to Saltmarsh. They wanted to sail somewhere else to go do this thing. So I made it up on the spot. I grabbed like from Donjon. I started quickly like finding tavern names, like, you know, getting them to role play a little bit while I filled in this thing. And then boom, they're at Redbridge. And we created a bunch of lore, and I made up a bunch of stuff, as a GM does. Like, oh, you had this prepared all along. This is crazy. So now they kind of like took a full left-hand turn. If they decide they wanted to take horses and ride back to Saltmarsh, like I've got a whole other area and all that stuff to think about. So in the 70-30 kind of idea, do you end up doing some of that stuff? Because it sounds like you have a ridiculous amount planned, like, you know, a month or 3 months worth.
Mm-hmm.
And then somehow you poll people along the way, listen to what they're doing, and then plan the next gig.
Mm-hmm.
What if they...
So it can happen. I mean, like the thing about it is like they need to have a central place to come back to all the time. So they can't just leave and go off to another part of the planet. They still got to come back home, the central base. Otherwise, their characters are like, okay, make a new character. Your characters are gone. So they're going to go off exploring somewhere else. You're going to retire them. Because there has to be some understanding that like there is still like a central part of this where they're having to work together and having to come together to do that. So they can't just go off and do their own thing indefinitely. Also, just as well, like whenever you get to the scheduling portion, there has to be a way for your players to mix and match. You're not just stuck with the same group every week. So there has to be a way for you to like mix them together. So it becomes very hard for them to just go off and do their thing forever, because then it just becomes a campaign as opposed to a West March at that point.
Okay. Yep. So I get it. So there's a natural limit to it. Like essentially with a campaign, like I just mentioned, that crew are going to be over and over and over again for weeks and weeks, so they can kind of go on their own story. But West March is random. Like you say, okay, I've got this Friday at 4. Who's here? And then whoever shows up kind of gets in. So kind of like
kinda, yeah.
It is it. So it's kind of fully episodic in the sense of when you run a session, everybody's back to base, because if they're going to go on another adventure, they kind of have to be at the base.
It honestly depends. Like, so I've seen that completely 100% episodic is people don't like that for the most part.
Okay.
Like it kind of helps to have some familiarity with the same group, at least for a little bit. So like what I do is I don't have completely altering every week. I have the same group for 2 months, and then I switch them all apart. So I tell them, okay, you're going to be together for 2 months, and then you guys got to put a new group together at the 2-month mark, and then they get a new group together. Then they're together for 2 months. So that way, one of the biggest things that kind of drives engagement is being able to form at least 2 or more connections with other people, and I mean the players, not the characters, and being able to keep that connection going. Otherwise, they kind of just fall apart, because a lot of it's being able to come back and have that familiarity with at least one other person. I mean, 2 other people in the group. So it's not good to have completely 100% episodic and random session scheduling. It becomes very granular, I guess, to some point. Like it's a lot of logistics. Plus, on top of that, people don't get a good chance to get to know each other either.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one of the main things that I think kind of like gets in the way. It works really well for servers that are like 100% free, where like you can just come and play whenever you have chance. But those kind of servers have like hundreds of thousands of people, like big, that are just coming in just to kind of drop by whenever they have a chance to play, not really wanting to like have familiarity with the other characters or players.
Yeah.
And so that's a way that it tends to work. But other than that, I really wouldn't suggest it. Yeah, that's
all right. Cool. That helps. A much better idea, I think, because I haven't run a West Marches, so I'm still trying to wrap my head around it from a campaign perspective, and it makes so you're just like, oh, okay, you guys go off into the wilds of the part that I have completely uncharted, even though you don't want to do any of these other 19 things that I have that all sound pretty cool to me, but you guys go over. Okay, cool. The option is you guys are off to explore that, and maybe we can turn that into a campaign some other time, but for now, make new characters and I'll meet you back at base.
Yeah, but even if I would find it very hard for them to kind of go off unless you, because you have a spigot of like being able to control how much information you give them. So like at the start, it wouldn't be very many things, and so like what I would give them at the very minimum is some like basic information that everyone would know, like 1 to 2 areas, some basic rumors, and maybe a treasure map of something to find. But they don't get to find out all of the things they got to go through between here and actually getting the treasure. They just kind of get a map with some basic instructions, and then they find everything else on the way. So
and you don't find too many people like just turning totally in the other direction and wandering off into the woods.
They can. I mean,
because they
entirely can.
Like,
but what I would, and so that's where like a lot of preparation with like having the regions set up, and then putting the numbering and the difficulty put down comes upon. Yeah. Because let's say that they are in a level 1 region, they can go left, but then that's a level 9 region, so they go from level 1 to level 9, and then they get bombarded by a bunch of golems that, and then that would be a story to tell. It'd be like, okay, I am the only person that survived the almost near TPK as they run back up,
which is pretty good. If the first group comes out and then one person staggers back with the story, that's pretty good. To that point, are you revealing like danger level explicitly? Are you telling them like rumors about maybe don't go over there?
A lot of that.
How much information are you giving that way? Yeah.
I try to keep as much of it secret as possible. So whenever they go to a new region, they don't know what to expect. And because mine is like multiple realities and universes kind of being put into one spot, none of it is pulled from the monster manual. It's like a lot of stuff they've never experienced. It's like, okay, so what is this creature named, for example, something we had last night, the Hunger Between Worlds. So it's like a creature that it entirely lives upon eating the things that you've eaten. And so like it pulls the food from the last 24 hours from your stomach and you get exhaustion, and it's really crazy. But they don't know how lethal this creature is, and so they're coming up against it, and they're like, okay, it's kind of crazy. Oh, one of our characters is down. It's our barbarian, and then they're like having to make a decision of like, okay, do we run or do we stay? And a lot of that unknown is meant to kind of keep them in suspense of trying to understand, are they in the right spot or do I need a different approach? And then that's where a lot of the planning comes in place with each other.
But that's something that you would set up at the start, is to say, this is the situation that you might get into, right? And be prepared for that.
Yeah.
Again, probably.
Yeah, exactly. Like with expectations, definitely wanting to know, let the players know like well ahead of time on onboarding, like this is what you're going to most likely expect. This is how to interact with each other, and this is how a successful West March looks versus a not successful one, and giving like real examples of like what it is that you're envisioning versus not envisioning, and kind of helping people more along that path.
Nice. I just had one little follow-up thing when you're talking about this as well, because you were talking about people going out, coming back to a home base. But I wasn't sure how that worked if you have like a more or less set group that's staying together for a couple of months at a time.
How does that work? So
a session, or is it a little bit longer? How does that work for you?
It honestly depends. Like I don't limit them how long they can stay away from the base, as long as they come back by that 2-month mark. But the big limiting factors for them are that if they do leave the base, they have to bring food and water, and they might end up running out of food and water at some point. But also, if they are going off for this extensive amount of time, they're having all of those notes, those updates to their journals and stuff that they're keeping with them along the way. But if they don't come back to save it, then they lose it all. They can't share it.
That's cool too. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, I'm wondering about that.
That's a good wrinkle.
Yeah, it's like you kind of want to share the progress of others, but if your characters die, then so like one of the things I have is I made this really intuitive map making system, where I have parchment and vellum. The vellum is waterproof, but the parchment is not. So if it starts to rain, they lose their maps entirely, or all their journal notes just get deleted, unless they have like a map base. Yeah. So it could be very, I guess to that extent, it could be very extreme, but it's trying to find as many ways to keep it dynamic, but also like having them be able to interact with each other and plan a lot as much as they can without making it too extensive, because it's entirely preventable. But if they don't talk about it, they don't plan, then they're going to be punished for it, which is the whole point of trying to like teach them how to do it, like teach them how to interact with each other with basic things.
And I guess you would want to foreshadow some of that stuff, right?
Yeah.
But
exactly. Like
that's also fun. Yeah.
Like before my sessions, I have like a list of like, these are the things that I kind of want to teach the whole West March that is a little new, and these are the etiquette things that I want to teach. So I talk about it before every single session, and then like during the sessions, I'll like make comments of like, you want to do this instead, you want to do that instead. So it's kind of like trying to like get them in the mind space of thinking more or less as a West March. So like I can entirely give them a list of instructions, but the likelihood that they'll remember is very low unless they have like repeated like stimulus about it. Yeah, all good things. Anything else, I suppose, before I continue on? Nope. Okay.
I'm good. Yeah.
So other practical tips. All right. So this is something that can be a little hard to explain, but it's basically making content in layers. And so along with the 70-30, I make fully detailed things for certain areas or regions only to a certain level. And so I have like 3 levels of like depth that I have for creating stuff. And so level 1 is basic information, location names, key NPCs, general purpose. That tends to be what my entire like skeletal framework tends to be for the most part. And then if I know that we are coming to a region and they're either going to be in that immediate locale, or it's an area or region that is surrounding where they might be discovering, then I add the second layer, which is secrets, treasures, and specific encounters. And that's important because let's say that we do go off into a hard left to that level 9 area, right? Like, because They might just go into that forest. Well, do I have stuff made just in case they do? I just want to make sure, like, if they do go there, that it's not like I'm just fumbling and then don't have anything to present. And then I'm improvising, which tends to be very hard with West Marches. And then layer 3, I only do if I know for sure that they're going into that region, or have like a 70 maybe percent plus chance that they're going to go there. For example, if I have a secret that was in an area they went to that has them going into another region or another area, then I will develop the deep lore, which is the history, the connections to other locations, and any complex storylines, things that connect to each other. That's when I have all the like take out the red line, the red string, and kind of put things together. I also developed areas 2 and 3 if the players have an interest. Remember how I was talking about like having an interest level between 0 and 10? I developed layer 2 if they have an interest level between 1 and 5. And then definitely anything higher than 5, I develop layer 3 because they're most likely going to get there in the next session or two, most likely. So then that way you're kind of like tiering what you're going to make. So like if you had to make session prep stuff like before a session, then the only thing you have to worry about is filling in the stuff for the deep lore, which is not that much more if you're kind of like layering stuff as you go. And a lot of that kind of comes down to making sure after your sessions that you're like making sure to update your numbering, making sure to update the interest, and that kind of helps a lot. It also helps a lot if you had things like Notion that had systems that automate a lot of that for you. So you had like a automated Notion like post GM thing that goes through the concept of like, okay, do you want to update your numbers on any of this? Or if you had a map like on paper, you can go through with pencil and just erase it and then write things over it. That also helps as well.
Yeah, I have a quick tech question on the Notion part of this.
Yeah.
Because you have the stuff you're hiding and as your GM, and the stuff you want to deliver to them from Notion. Are you kind of working all in Notion, or because I remember Avix was mentioning, or do you have like stuff that you can push to them that they can see, but also a little wall of magic that you can see behind? Because I think, and do you have systems to keep those separate?
So the lore master is 100% for the players. So they use it. I will help them with it if they have a lot. Like, let's say we had a lore dump a session, then I'll sit there and be like, okay, what do you guys want me to put? And then I'll help them with whatever they want. But my part is entirely separate from theirs. So like it's on a different page where they don't have access to. And then I have my own templates and stuff that I keep up with.
Yeah, because on Notion there's like the lower space, which is private, and then there's the stuff that's public. Although you can reference it, like, so some of the things I've done is I have their case files for my other one, the Monster of the Week, and I have their case file, and they can enter stuff in there. But there's a little section that says, it's like keeper files, and when they go in, for me, when I go into their system, I can see them, but when they go in, it just says, unavailable or whatever.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's exactly it. And so, if they don't have access to see that page, they're not going to see anything. Even if you link the database, it won't show them anything.
Yeah, they won't show them. Yeah, but that's okay.
That's a good question.
But you kind of like run it this way. Like, here's your lore. You guys, it's your job to keep up because this is your stuff. This is you're running, and this is my GM screen.
Yep. My stuff tends to be pre-made, and their stuff is like clean slate. They don't know anything. So
yeah,
and I just kind of like fill things in for my side as I go. Let's see. But other stuff, let's see. Content backlog. So this is kind of something that goes hand in hand with the content catalog, is the ready to use stuff. So I tend to not use a lot of the content that I make. Because they end up not going through it or not caring for it, which is fine. So anything they don't go through, I just kind of put it in the backlog, and then I just put it somewhere else entirely. So if they don't end up going into the broken down factory that is ran by like seagulls and it's from Florida because my campaign is crazy, then I'll copy it and then I'll put it somewhere else. But then I will make a note that I got to replace this or that for like the monsters, or how to make it higher in difficulty.
What did
or
you
lower.
do? Create Epcot?
What was that? I have Disney. It's ran by Mookie Moose in my setting. It's crazy. My campaign is very all over the place, but they love it. Like last night we had a character that was a peanut butter sandwich, and I made a whole race that I did to get today for it. And I was like, cool, this happened. It gets very off the wall sometimes.
Yeah, the butternuts, I think you.
Yeah, the butternuts.
called it.
Yep, the butternuts. Yep, I made a whole faction
and the
in
crunchy.
subclass. And yeah, the
The
crunchy.
crunchy cannot stand the creamy, and vice versa. They will not nary the two shall meet.
Yep, that's exactly it. There's the crunchy ones, and there's smooth ones. They're really cool. Yeah, it was on stream last night, and I'm just like, okay, great. I guess I'm making the sub race now, and I did. I just went too far into it. So something else that I tend to do is with hand in hand of like having the backlog is plan to make 30% more content than you think you'll need, because players will miss about approximately 30% of what you create. And if you create a lot of stuff on the front end, then you're going to be a lot safer on the back end whenever you start getting into the more complex things as things kind of go month by month by month by month. So making a little bit more than what you need makes it so it's more secure for yourself and for the players. And also, you might realize that you might need a very, very specific dungeon or like a very specific NPC that maybe you only made like 2 months ago. So it kind of saves you work on the back end. Because whenever things get more complex as things go along, you want to try to make it as easy as possible for yourself. That's something I've seen that works very well for people. Also recycling content as well. Maybe just reskin things. That tends to work very well. So
Now, do you?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, not to interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you have to keep the players at the same level?
I do. I feel like it makes it easier, like if they're not different levels. Because whenever you get to like a level mismatch, then it's like one person feels like their contribution is not as great as another player's.
Yeah.
Right. And then you start to get resentment, which is not a great feeling to have in your campaigns. So what I do is something called cohorts, and so I'll have players about up to 20 or 30 people be in the same group. And then like half a year later, I'm not at this point yet, but like in about 2 months, I'm gonna have another cohort where they're starting off in the same area that the first group was in, but the other group has already moved past to another part of the world. So they're in two completely different areas that are not really 100% communicating with each other, but at least they're like, I'm recycling the content to some degree. So then I can give Region 1 to another DM. But like, here, you can take all my stuff, you can run it, take that group. I'm going to continue with the first group and develop the world along that way. And so that's like how I content plan my stuff for multiple GMs right now. Even though it's just me right now, but it's not going to be for long. I actually got a couple of GMs that are going to be coming on pretty soon. If you do start with multiple GMs, it could be both easy and hard. It depends on how well meshed the organization is of each person. One person's organization style could be like another person's nightmare. So that's what it largely depends upon, is making sure that you have actually dynamically like compatible ways to view the world and you make things together. Otherwise, you're going to be fighting with each other all the time, which is not great. So that's another completely other conversation beyond this, but multiple GMs can be kind of hard from the start. So it started out with one GM, one small group, like 10 people, and then kind of developing from there. It's a lot easier to add stuff on, but if you have to remove stuff away, it destroys the West March. You kind of want to start as small scale as you can. And that's all I have for the long-term content planning and strategy. So that's just like one bullet point. So I can take a little pause there. So like, what do you guys think? It's a lot of like, it's intricate, right? Like it's a lot of different ways on how you can plan it, but trying to make things as easy as possible for you while also making it easy for the players as things kind of go along. Like that's really the goal.
Do you throw in a bunch of do you have random tables and things that you like, because it sounds like you get recycled content, so when they step in somewhere you're like PC here and grab this, or do you have like some random tables like and just like, how do you kind of manage that a little bit if you're
For me, like in my world, I have like a real world clock. So there is like, it's based on the Eastern Standard Time. So if they're playing at 7 p.m., then it's like 7 p.m. in the world. It's actually dark outside. And so I'll have different tables depending on what part of the day that they're playing in. like the undead and the vampires don't come out till nighttime, etc. But yeah, like I do play in like different tables for different parts of the day, and I also play in like different things that are only available at certain times. So like if they want to do a particular quest, they actually have to like try to set up for a date and time that is at that particular time. Like I have like I have a quest where they have to be up at 2:34 a.m. in order to solve one one particular adventure. If they want to, they don't have to. But it's like one of the many options that they might be interested in. So like trying to throw a bunch of lures and just seeing what it is that they kind of nib on, essentially.
Well, wait a minute. Do you have to be up then too?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a commitment for sure.
You masochist.
Hello, no sleep.
No sleep for any of us. We're gonna have to go out to the middle of the graveyard to try to find peanut butter sandwiches. Yeah, I mean it can be exciting, but it'd be like a one-time thing, like a special event, not like a constantly going thing.
Yeah. And so listening to that, are you then like, is it like real time? Are you sort of Shadow Dark Torch time in that like, all right, well, we're playing from 7 to 9 tonight, or we're playing from 6 to 9 tonight. So it's 6 to 9 in the world, and that's the amount of time your characters get. Because usually, like in playing campaigns and stuff, like you take a long rest and it's the morning, that sort of stuff. But it sounds like the clock is the clock.
It depends. So like if they are going out adventuring into the wilderness, then they're expected to kind of stay outside in the wilderness for like a week between sessions. So they have to bring 7 days of food and water between session to session, or they die between sessions because they starve. So that's the other aspect. But otherwise, if they're in base, I just have them long rest between sessions, most likely, and that kind of keeps them tip top because it's also a really lethal world. So even though they might be at full health, I still need to have things that are able to kill them, despite the fact that they're at this full capability. Yeah. So it's a lot of that, but also for them, they don't really want an extremely nitty gritty. Like we want to make sure that we don't have a long rest between sessions because of the playstyle that they have. And so I kind of I started out with a very gritty system, and then I kind of pulled back because I realized they didn't like it. So it's just like adapting on the go. That could be hard because you might start off a completely way, but let's say that 100% of your West March is now replaced in month 4. They might like something different than the first group might had. So that becomes challenging, I think, making that switch.
Okay. Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah, because I think I run a lot of my games they're sort of narrative heavy, so I'm kind of like, would your character have rations? Yeah, probably. Cool. You'd be able, or let's roll some dice and see if you had that. Like I might, I kind of am very loose with it because it's more towards the adventuring, but it sounds like for West Marshes, you got to be a little bit more tight about resource management and things and making that system kind of gel, at least to make it more of a resource challenge.
I will say that I would not recommend it unless you had automated systems to keep track of it. I play on Foundry, so I have things that keep track of that stuff automatically. I don't have to.
Yeah.
So encumbrance, torches, ammunition, all of that's kept tracked by the system. I don't have to manually do it myself. Otherwise, we would never stop. We would just not play like that because it'd be very hard.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there.
You're good.
The way I've always done it is if it's readily available in the area, they have it. If not, and they're like 2 weeks from the nearest civilization, you better be keeping up with it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Even like if you did set it up on Notion, you could set it up so that way every day it can remove specific things with like automated tasks. So you could also keep track of it on there. And then if it runs into a problem that run out of a certain resource, it could send like a webhook to Discord if you set it up. So that way it says, hey, no more food, no more water. You have this much time until whatever. So there's lots of ways you can do it, but I wouldn't recommend gritty play unless you had systems to manage the gritty stuff, because then it gets just too cumbersome, I believe. Because then you're doing like a management game as opposed to playing the game. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and because the only part I ever would manage resources are the ones that matter. Things like torches, for example. Like if they don't have night vision and dark vision, and they didn't bother to bring a torch, and they're in the middle of the dungeon and they fall into a puddle, like the experience of, oh boy, you're going to be in the dark now, and you're going to have to crawl out of this cave. That's an experience. It's cool. Whether they have their bedroll or not, like who gives a So trying to figure out tracking only the resources that would make it fun and challenging to do in that regard,
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and then having to track them.
Yeah. That's the other
Because
aspect.
D&D Beyond doesn't have that, which is I think one of the character sheets. But it sounds like Foundry's pretty awesome. I keep hearing a lot of good things about Foundry, so
I would recommend Foundry. Roll20 has it with API, but API scripts can be very funky. So
Yeah.
that's the downside. But anyway, so any other questions before I go into flexible content?
No, but on a side note, you've given me plenty of things to think about for that island game.
Right, already. Like, how are you gonna plan
It's
things?
like, how are they gonna keep up with how much wood they have on hand, how much food, how much this? Because it's like they are shipwrecked on this island.
Yeah. Yep. Keeping in mind what it is that the goals are and how to circumvent those goals, or how to like get up to those like how to get past the barrier is a big aspect too. Like making sure you know those things ahead of time. All right. So flexible adaptive content. So being able to make your content that you do make, having it be as adjustable as possible is really good, because then let's say that you do find out from one session that, oh, these players don't like this as much. Well, you could either keep the same content and then it's kind of, they don't really get to like it as much, or you can kind of find a way on how you can adjust it slightly so that way kind of like it's a banger for the entire West March. That aspect can be a learned skill, and it probably something that will take some time, but it's being able to like change and improv like the hard and the soft stuff of the game. And so that's why I only make 70% of the content ahead of time. And sometimes like I'll leave some stuff like completely left blank, even if it's like the session of that will come in. And so some things that I've made that are kind of modular are things like encounter shells. So that's whenever you create swappable elements of an adventure, and so that includes things like monsters, NPCs, and rewards. So if you can switch which character is there, which monster is there, or like what rewards they get, that'd be great. And so something that this works really well with is that like evolving dungeons. And so the thing about a West March is that it's not just the one and done. Like you also have to show the consequences or the results of what it is that happens in result to what they've done. So yeah, we cleared the dungeon, but now what? So now maybe like a bunch of slimes are going to move in, and being able like to have that dungeon repopulate with things that make sense from the local area, and also why. And so it's kind of like you're adding like a history, like chronological list of things to kind of replace the dungeon with over time. And so that's what I mean by encounter shells.
Now you got slimes.
Yep, you cleared out the dungeon. It's got no more constructs. Now you got a slime problem. And also with that comes whatever slimes bring, right? Or maybe like it gets filled with bandits, and now you have to worry about a prisoner situation where like having to rescue someone because bandits moved in, right? And like having the consequence of what it is that having that thing there, like what is it that it causes to the local area. And so that way you have content that's like repeatable, but also it makes sense. And the players really like whenever they can see that their actions resulted in actual in-game, like real-world consequences or changes. So things like being able to replace features in a map that's already kind of created is one of the easiest things to do. Something else, floating NPCs. So let's say that they really, really, really love this one NPC that, they just kind of get attached to certain characters, right? Well, you can have it like turn into like a wandering merchant or a bard or like a messenger, and they can appear in different regions, but then like giving them like an adaptable backstory that can connect to these different regions and why they're moving along. So that tends to work really well. Level scaling is another way to kind of keep things modular. And so it's preparing content that can scale for different party levels. And so something that I made is I made a document that's, I think it's 100 pages long, but it's it's got encounters and quests for levels one for every odd numbered level. So 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, up to 19. And then so that way, like if they're at a beach, I can get like the properly leveled encounter and quest that they need for for their specific level at that specific location. So then I could just drop it in. So that's like a template that could work well. You can also tier treasures that way. You can tier puzzles that way as well. And that's something that you don't need it. Would it help? Yes. Starting out, you probably don't need it. But if you're planning on going like multiple months or maybe even years, then eventually you're going to need it because you're going to want to have the capability to add things on the fly when things get more complex. So it's not something I would recommend at the start, but maybe somewhere like midway, like maybe 4 or 5 months in to kind of start making stuff like that. So let's see. Other stuff, interest tracking, we kind of talked about that a little bit. So designing locations that can be placed wherever is needed helps a lot. And so if you see that they have a particular interest with a certain faction, then being able to like drag and drop stuff into your game, but then also applying that faction template onto that location would help. And so something that I made is something like I made today for here, I'll share my screen. For like the bread knots, which I will show you what I mean. So this is like being made so that way it's like made in mind that it could be applied to a West March. Besides just the sub race, this is really what I mean. And so like this is what I call a faction template. And so it creates like a general list of what it is that they're about. But also I have, don't mind the stat blocks, I haven't finished it 100%, but I have, it's hard to tell, kind of see the names here. Like I have a list of all of these creatures, CR1, CR3, CR5, that can be included. So that way, if they at some point realize like, hey, we want to know more about the Breadnoughts at level 9, then I can add this smooth touch diplomat in there. So then I have like a general like one size fits all like for the entire campaign faction of the game. So being able to like plan your factions out like this helps immensely because you don't know what faction they're going to end up working with or end up being enemies against, or maybe just being entirely neutral to. But it's better to have stuff made ahead of time and having templates for these things rather than not having it, because then you're having to improv stuff. You have to like, it just kind of gets messy from there. If you have to like improv things and it kind of gets wishy-washy. Let's see. Kind of going back to my stuff here. Okay. Other things that I've seen help a lot is having things that are very responsive to what the players are doing. Consequence flowcharts. If they do come upon a certain situation, like if you're planning out your pathways and making your quest lines, as you will, maybe having some very real consequences that have very real outcomes to the world. And you can have it set up so that way you have like either like if they go to the war against the dragon, if they kill the dragon, this is what'll happen. If they don't kill the dragon, this is what'll happen. If they instead help the dragon, then this is what'll happen, right? Like there's different ways that they kind of go about with this dragon situation. Being able to like have an outcome for all the realistic outcomes that they would probably get into would help a lot, because then you can more easily cascade effects after that. But I wouldn't go as far as like making an entire branch of how one decision would go about, because you don't know what they'll end up choosing and you don't want to kind of go too much depth unless they actually do go about one general direction. And then in which case I would kind of like change the world a little bit more after that with prep. Emergent storylines. Okay, so the large aspect of a West March is that a lot of it, I would say all of it, is really based on player actions. But it's also based mostly on player interest as well. So let's say that a player wants to do something that maybe you didn't make. Like being able to have the capability for the players to create content actually takes a lot off of you to some extent. And so like if a player wants to open a tavern, right? That's not something that you planned, but they want to make that. So now having the capability to for them to include their thoughts and their ideas into the game will help you a lot more. It also makes them a lot more invested. if you give them a template of like, okay, you want to open a tavern, I have a lot to do on my end for imagining for Westmarch. So I'm going to give you these templates, and I want you to make it. So that way, if you really want this tavern, now we can have your emergent storyline. But I want you to help me with this. You kind of like take some of the work off of yourself with that. And a lot of people will say yes for that. Like if they can have their ideas, they just got to be told how to do it. And if you put the limitations on there on what the limits are, what is okay and versus not okay, then more than likely than not, it's going to be just fine. But like, for example, I had a player today tell me that she wants to, for example, told me, oh, where are you? Edge. Okay. So she has an idea of what she wants to do for her character, Damia. And she wants to change to a different subclass with a very specific teacher. And I said, yeah, I'm willing to do it as long as you're able to help me with it. Otherwise, it will be kind of hard. And so then we came upon a time that we can meet up together and I can give her the templates to do it. Easy. So it's stuff like that that kind of prepares you so that you can help them and it keeps them more invested and it keeps them around longer. Other stuff. Player engagement over time. So player engagement kind of differs a lot more than traditional D&D, right? Like with West Marches, it's having to follow a group of people that are more or less kind of traversing together, but like in smaller groups of that major group, right? And so that could be very hard to kind of keep the engagement of every single person. And every single person might have different interests of what it is that they kind of like the most. And so one of the biggest things that I definitely tell people to do is make sure that for whatever game that you make, that you have an idea of what your most ideal player, like if you had to find like the perfect player that would love your game, that you know what that looks like. So you're not adding the wrong people into your game. A lot of West Marches don't do that and they just kind of let anyone join. That's the worst thing you could do because then the players have a lot of power. They clash with each other and then it dies, which is not ideal and it's not great. Want to make sure you have the right people with the right play style in your game. So that's the first thing. But if you already got that, then it's all about making architecture in your games in order to kind of keep the engagement going and going and going and going and going. So that way, whenever you get past your first obstacle, it's like, well, what do we do now? And so one of the things I do is called progression loops. And so that's whenever you have set up short, medium, and long-term goals, but ensuring that each goal is like a meaningful progression that kind of connects to each other goal. And so if the long-term goal is for us to defeat Madnar, the crystal puppet master, which is in our game, then what's the medium-term goal? So the midterm goal is for us to basically to get to that point, we need to go to this dungeon and we need to find the time wizard in order to undo this catastrophe that we're in. But the short-term goal in order to get to that point is for us to do this kind of mini dungeon in our base to unlock bags of holding. So kind of like you kind of have like the secular sequence that kind of like they're kind of playing along. But if you put it out there as what they are needing to do, and you also show what it is that their reward is going to be as a result of working towards that, your players will have something to latch onto, and they will work towards that because then they have to do less thinking for themselves. The less you can have them think about stuff like that, the better, especially when it comes to goals, and the more likely you can keep the group together. But then also having an idea of like, okay, well, short term, what's after that? Like making sure that you have like the next two things already kind of like preemptively set up potentially. Medium, I would have like the next one, and then long term is probably going to be your one goal for like a couple of months at least. Other engagement stuff includes discovery mechanics. So like in my region of the Dairylands, we have a secret dungeon, which is where the time wizard is at. In order for them to find the time wizard, they need to like find out where the dungeon is first off, but then also they need to find these specific clues that are scattered across these specific areas. So then I have like a map and I have the content kind of put down, and I will show you an example of something that I made for a book that I'm writing, so that you can kind of see what I mean. So this is for the mother load. I think it's here. All right, so this is something that I am currently working on to publish. So you see, so this is the gold banana. So in order for them to get the gold banana, it's in this specific dungeon, but in order for them to get to it, it's got to start here. Starts here. So they basically have to be in the city for them to get these specific rumors, which leads to them possibly taking this subquest. Well, once they have this subquest, they then get information that leads them to this mural over here, which gives them a clue, but it doesn't go beyond there. Because after they do this part, it unlocks the next tier of clues. You see this yellow line here? This yellow line of clues doesn't appear until after they finish the entire line for the green stuff. And so then at that point, they can get the dying monk's last words. They can get like this jungle survival guide is now available for them. They can then go over here and find that there's a torn treasure map there. They can find this fisherman's charm, and all of these things are split apart. So that way they can slowly, collectively, over a long period of time, they can get more clues for them to start the orange-green line, which they start to realize, like, oh, we need a key to go to this specific dungeon. Then they do the dungeon to get this key, which allows them to go to this specific dungeon and enter the first gate to then get the banana. So that's a way of like splitting it up to kind of like have people gather information across a vast region, but it's not just one group. It's like multiple groups are gathering these clues. And whenever they get a big clue like that, I make sure to give them something that makes it very obvious that this is a very important clue. So it doesn't just get lost. Like I might give them a handout, which is different than them just writing their own note. I might give them a card, which is that way they can see like, oh, these cards are important because these cards are part of a major mystery for us to find something that's different than what we're doing just normally traversing the world. So the more you can make it feel special that this is a very important part of a major mystery quest line, the better off that they'll likely get through the entire quest line. Otherwise, it just kind of gets lost in the minutia of everything if it's just kind of the same as everything else. So things like you can give them a rumor board. You can have them have like, I use Miro, for example. You can set up a board on there. You can upload any picture you want, and you can have them write on it, and they can like set up their own red lines and tape or whatever you want. That's something that could be kind of cool. Maybe some groups don't want that. Maybe some groups would rather just have the cards and that's it. Just kind of depends on the group. And if they ever do get stuck, maybe like having some sort of like eureka moments where like maybe they might see a pattern where normally there's not. And so the less you can try to have things be dependent on checks, typically the better with the West March. And so in my West March, I don't let them just make perception, investigation, or insight checks. I instead give them information and they tell me how exactly they want to go about like interacting with certain objects. Because then it kind of keeps them in that mode of like, okay, I need to be constantly be thinking about myself in relation to other things. And the more I can kind of keep them in that headspace, the more likely that they are to continue that with any other thing in the world. So it kind of requires like a different mode of thinking, both depending on the game. Other things that kind of keep people engaged are evolving challenges. So like having things scale in difficulty for combat encounters. Maybe like there's like they need a certain amount of raw power to overcome certain obstacles. Like maybe in order to like for the example, in order to overcome the quest at 2:34 a.m. Maybe like in addition to the time thing, they realize like, oh, yeah, like no matter what level we're at, we know for sure we're gonna need at least 8 or more characters. So it might be like a special event where you do have a large group in order to overcome this one obstacle. Or maybe you need a total amount of strength. So maybe in order to overcome lifting a boulder, you need a total strength score between everyone to be like 200 or 100. 200 would probably be too much. But if you need like all 6 characters to have 100 for a total, then that makes a different party composition than one that it could be anything. So stuff like that could be very unique, like finding ways for them to mix and match for different reasons. Political and social challenges could also be another thing, like if they're wanting to run for mayor or president, if that's the thing that they want to do. Moral dilemmas with increasing significant consequence can be very great, especially if you have some political intrigue. I wouldn't do too much, but some political intrigue is good. If it's things like, I guess if you were kind of going up a single creature like Strahd, that could be something that could be used. But I wouldn't do it like for like whole scale like political campaigns, because then it kind of it's a little gritty after a while. Let's see. Content revelation. So pacing, how many secrets you unveil, is also another direct correlation to engagement. So if you reveal too much, they're going to get overwhelmed, and everything starts to feel the same. If you reveal too little, people start to get bored. You kind of have to find the sweet spot with people. That takes a little playing. If you kind of like balance how much you reveal in relation to discovery, that's good. I definitely wouldn't engage people with something like that more than once a week. Once a month is a good balance, I find, especially if it's like a major like world like secret. If it's something minor, like hey, they just found out the next quest, the next part of this one minor mystery, I wouldn't really make it as big of a deal. But the more you can have these large interconnected world unveilings, the better it'll be, because then they feel like they're progressing in more than just character level. They're progressing and understanding and unlocking things that they have access to. Other things. So, okay, this is something that I would try to add from the start, but it's very, 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 very hard unless you like have a lot of systems already made. Character development opportunities. So, books for personal growth. Like I have the players start out with of course they have their basics, but I tell them to make like a basic outline of what it is that their characters are interested in and what it is that they are wanting to go towards. And so every session, what I do is that I ask them a question that is about character development. So it might be like this week I asked them if they had to make one rule that the entire world had to like follow, what would it be and why? And so then they get to develop their character as they go. They kind of feel that in that sense they're kind of progressing. So for the people that are very lore based and are very like much the actors or the faces of the party, then they feel satisfied because then they feel like they're developing something in some way, even though the world and environment might not naturally like cater towards it. That's kind of one way to kind of engage those people. But it can be hard to keep track over a long period of time because let's say that at a certain point they develop their characters so much, they start to develop wants. They start to develop things that they want their characters to do. So you have to be like very open and receptive to like having emergent storylines emerge because of that. And the more players that you have and the more often that you ask them meaningful questions, the more likely that will come about. So that's one thing to kind of keep in mind. World changing moments. So whenever it comes to like when I was talking about the quest lines with like the dragon and the war and stuff, having the world entirely change can be extremely stressful for a West March. And I would only do it sparingly, but like in my campaign, we just went from like a normal world to like a reality that is like time is warped, realities are crashing into each other, and it can be a very big change, but it came about due to actions that they had done. Something like that is something you have to like plan and have it be meaningful, but it will have them feel like it is like the biggest thing that they came up to. It's like a climax moment for them. So something to kind of plan like several months down the line. Let's see, what else? Mystery management. I mean, for the DM side, being able to have like your like one page for this one mystery, being able to check things off and write notes on what they have discovered so far is good because of the player versus GM facing side. You're gonna get wrapped up with knowing what you know versus what they know. So try to make it as easy on yourself as possible by having a part for yourself that is different from theirs. And then matching the rhythm to give them more discoveries. And even if you have to like hand feed it to them sometimes, because sometimes they go really far away from where you're intending to give it to them, you can then transfer it over, even though it's not in the same spot that it would have been. Let's see. Another thing. So actually, I'll pause there. So the next part is about engagement metrics, how to keep track of real numbers to know when your West March is going good versus bad. But I'll give some time for you guys to kind of to ask questions, and then we could take like a little break. But as you can see, like it's a lot of stuff, right? Like it's a lot of things that you could do, but not all of it has to be done. I mean, from the get go at least, it's just a lot of options on how to do things. What do you guys think?
Makes sense thus far.
I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot. It's
It is definitely a lot.
it's a lot. It's
mean,
it's like here's all the possible ways I could do stuff, and then it starts to become like, oh shit, what am I gonna do? Not all of it has to be done, and a lot of it's like it really depends on your world, what it is that you want to end up choosing, and I would choose a couple of things to help you start out and then develop over time.
Cool.
Well, one question I would have.
Sorry, go on.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say that's a lot of good info, but it's all like as I'm taking notes, it's a lot of actionable stuff that I can see how it would put things in action. That's all. Yeah.
Yep. It's a lot. I mean, I wouldn't use all of them together. Oh god, that'd be a nightmare. It really depends on the group.
Picking and choosing stuff, yeah.
Essentially, yep. I don't want to like PowerPoint you guys to death.
Sorry.
So there's like still a lot more even beyond this. So I guess whenever it comes to like the oh, my brain is kind of running out of juice. Whenever it comes to the content creation and implementation, is there maybe something that you guys would maybe think like you would maybe want to know a little bit more about? In specific, I go like in more in depth, and I can go in depth into a particular section of this, so that way I don't just read off another 40 slides to you or something.
Well, it's interesting. I would love to. I would like to love to have an answer for this, but one of the things I'm hearing a lot about this is like one of it is building both a world, right? So the writing, which is what we love to do. I mean, we're GMs, so we love to do that. So kind of creating this world and then also building this information infrastructure so that when the players come, you can step into it and run. Because I mean, I'm listening to this, and it sounds like once you're off and running, like, you know, the bull has left the pen, right? Like you're just, especially for a newbie, like ride that wave because they're going to go this way, they're going to go that way, you're going to get this, you know, the interest, and you're flying. So as much as I would love to kind of like say, oh, I need this and I need that, and I think I need, it feels like we're kind of like theorizing about the bike, and then we need, you know, to ride it. Like I'm gonna.
Yep.
Well, although in this case, I need to build the bike and then ride it.
Yep.
And get 10 other people to get on the arm pedal too. But yeah,
I would say like a lot of this information, like especially as I go more and more, it's like this is good for people that have already started and already gotten to the point where they have to like keep track and keep things together. So like the professional GM, they want to make sure to have a lot of this stuff ahead of time because they don't want to make a product and then have to rely on failure to develop something because then you lose your audience and there goes the money, right? So I guess if I had to like water all of this down, I would have something that you have a strategy for like what you're going to make. I would make some of it ahead of time, of course, and then have a strategy for how you're going to continue to make more content. And then I would add something to keep track of player engagement and interest and how you're going to get feedback from the players. And there's metrics involved with some of that, but that would be like more on like the medium advanced side of things and to kind of like have an idea of how to even run a Westmark to begin with. Because at this point, it's like, I just want to start. I just want to play, right? But what do I need to play? And so like from here on, it's like, I could talk about it, but it might be like an overwhelming, like whenever you get to the point of like tracking metrics for player engagement and feedback, it's like, well, I haven't really ran a Westmarch, so how would I know which one to choose at this point? And you really wouldn't need it from the start. Yeah. Okay, so the next part, engagement, metrics, and feedback. I'm not going to go into the extreme depth of every single possible metric, because there's so many things you can keep track of. The important part about this section is knowing when it is that your Westmarch is starting to like go take nosedive and like kind of waning in interest. And knowing how to fix it. That's the part that a lot of people kind of have like some, like there's like a minutia around it. It's like, how do I know if my Westmarch is going well versus not well? And so something that I keep track of for Westmarches is keeping track of not just the attendance, which is a big tracker. If they're missing multiple sessions, like a normal campaign, you kind of see a red flag there. But aside from that, it's like monitoring their activity in the session and between sessions. Like, okay, whenever I started out the Westmarch, I see that this person is very active in the role play. They're asking a lot of questions. They're sending messages to other players in the server. I can see that. But then I see that around like week 2 or 3, it starts to drop off. And it's like, okay, well, why? Why did that happen? Is it that they just lost interest? Why is it that they lost interest? And then we need to go back and either think about it or have something to look at. And so it's the having something to look at part that a lot of people kind of tend to miss. And so like during the sessions, I try to actively keep track of what it is that the players, each one of them, like engage strongly with, and what did they not engage strongly with. So I have, like, for example, I wrote something just for my Thursday group. I realized over time that each one of them has a specific strong interest and a strong dislike. But it took me having to like write down, like, okay, like Pidge loves it whenever she can have a chance to like integrate her character in a story-like fashion. But whenever it came to like things of extreme structure, like whenever there was a lot of like having to do things in a particular process in the game, she kind of like lost interest. But I would have to like keep track of that stuff. And so if I have a lot of sessions where it's a lot of like, okay, I'm adding a lot of processes, then she will naturally kind of like nosedive over time. And then maybe just drop off entirely. And so keeping track of those like small little perceptions about people is what's gonna kind of keep people together. But also you kind of tend to see like, okay, maybe these two people shouldn't be in the same group. Maybe I gotta like split them up a little bit. And you also might like at some points, and I know that I have in the past, I realized that maybe one person wasn't in particularly a great fit for the West March, and having to remove them from the West March, because if I didn't, then maybe other people might look at that interaction and might create a lot of friction, and then kind of that also will negatively impact people's what's it called, like experience in the game. And so it's very important to try to like keep track of what it is that they're like engaging with, or like what is that they're more excited about. Because then you realize like, okay, like I see that Yasmini, which is one of my other players, like she really loves like the roleplay aspect of her character, and she loves mystery and exploration a lot more than anyone else. But then there's someone like Mumed that likes planning, but he hates things having to be oversimplified. But then I have a player like Dova who's very chaotic. He's very chaotic, but he doesn't like to think. So it's like if I put them next to each other and it was just them two in a group, it would be like a very hard rub with each other. And so like there's a time and a place to like put people together, and having different personalities and different engagements strengths in a party is okay and good, as long as it's not just those two or like a small group. Like if it was this group of 5 or 6, you could have different stronger interests. Like my best group has, like if I was to read it off, their interests are love story, chaotic tryhard, loves exploration, loves planning, loves helping but not planning, and then the last person is like an emergent lifesaver. So it's like, okay, they're all very different, but it kind of like works out in the end with like keeping things balanced with each other. So if you have too much of one thing, or like one interest, it also can make it very, how can I put it? If you eat a lot of chocolate, you'll hate chocolate, right? If you have too much of it, you kind of want to keep things balanced to some extent. And that kind of goes with like player engagement and like what it is that they're interested as a whole. And so being able to recognize that the capability of how it is that people interact, that's the part that would keep your West March together. Also, having the capability to have them give input as well is an extremely strong thing that helps. So like every, I would say 6 weeks, I do like a check-in where I'm like, how do you guys feel about the game? Like, how do you guys, like, what are the most memorable moments? Like I check to see what's going on, like that they remember. Sometimes I make it anonymous if it's kind of like more on the like critical side, where like I'm wanting to know something specific, but people might be shying away from giving like an honest answer. So then in that case, I might make an like anonymous feedback option. But trying to gauge like a health for how they feel about things, like how they feel about mechanics, worlds, how they feel about specific things. Like if you, especially if you noticed that there's like a drop of interest somewhere, having questions about that helps a lot. But having like a list of engagement warning signs also helps. So signs that a person is like getting close to drop off is whenever you see diminishing engagement, which happens most around like the 3-week mark with people, especially as like they see that their expectation of the game maybe didn't meet what they had thought in their mind. That's whenever you start to see like, you know, interest drop a lot. In which case, I would like target that person and kind of like have like a one-to-one talk of like, what's going on? Like, is it that maybe the expectation of the game is not meeting what you were thinking? Like, what is it that I could do? And that's how I kind of tend to keep people more in the game. Changes in behavior, especially large changes. Like, let's say someone loved taking notes. Well, now they're not taking notes anymore. Or maybe like they like character development, but they're not character developing anymore. That's another like big change for people. And then it's like, well, what do I do? So like having strategies to be able to like bring people back and reinvigorate the energy, like with a shakeup event, that tends to help out a lot. So as an example, after my West Marches started in July, we kind of had a drop off around the 1 month mark where people didn't have that same energy of like, oh, this is new, we're all coming together. But now it's like, well, I feel like I'm stuck. I feel like I'm not really able to keep up with what's going on. So like having being able to reinvigorate that by kind of going back to the origins of like what it is that they had kind of like make them hyped is kind of hard to do at times, but it is possible. Where you maybe have to like drop off some things. Maybe you have to like give like a recap of what's happened so far, or maybe you might have to change some mechanics or drop some things off. It really depends. Like the simpler you can make the West March for the players, the better. The less they have to think of, the better. But also you want to make sure that everyone is actually connecting together. So even though everyone might be like on the same page of what's going on, if this player hasn't connected to other players, they're gonna drop interest because they're gonna see that things get more complicated. Then it kind of feels like work after a while. Like they're just having to keep track of like all of these current events without any payback of it making it more fun for them. And that's where like a lot of West March tend to die off, is that they forget about having to connect people together. And so I've had things like we had like an in-character catch-up session, or like it was like an open thing, like an event where it was we weren't playing, like it wasn't on the BTT, but we would show up and kind of like have like a social call where we're all like pretending to be our characters but in a call. And that worked. I mean, it helped people connect to each other. And if they attended and if they like connected with other characters, then they would get like a little reward for it the next session that they played. So that's something that I've done. So trying to think of ways to dynamically connect people together with like community-like events in the same way that you would an actual community, like actually tends to work very well with people in the West March. I've done things like I've had celebratory like events where like I celebrated a person coming out of onboarding, like matching players with other players, so that way like a veteran player can show an onboarding player like what it is that has to be done, and having them have like a mentor that helps. Having like little celebrations, like a little school celebration, or like a graduation where like people are like given something because they accomplished going through onboarding. That helps as well. But even like beyond that, you can also have that like, hey, this is like this player's 10th session, yay, like celebrate, like being able to engage them directly helps a lot with that. So those are like some strategies on how you can keep people engaged. And once you kind of get past, I would say like the 8 to 10 week mark, it tends to be more or less safe that player probably will stay for a while. You tend to lose people most around like 3 to 6 weeks. Is when people kind of drop off the most, when they realize it's not for them, which can be kind of hard, especially if you're trying to start out and everyone hasn't played a West March before, and it's like if you have a lot of that group drop off, then the campaign could fall apart. So it's very important that if you are starting a West March, to have a lot of that group already kind of know each other before you start it. Otherwise, you run into a risk of it just falling apart constantly at the start. That's all I really have for metrics, really. What kind of metrics do you guys keep track of? Any metrics for your games? In your DMing? Like, what kind of stuff do you guys keep track of?
I do some of the similar stuff in terms of keeping track of like what a specific player is into or what their character is after, right? But I'll take a lot of stuff from at the end of a session doing stars and wishes, and then have that at the top of their character sheet. So I'm like, I know for this session I want to include this and this and this. But yeah, that seems like a good thought as well.
Which is a really good system. I like that.
Yeah, and then noticing hopefully what individual players engage with the most. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was curious. Do you use stars and wishes for all of your? Does that play into your system at all, Paladin?
I use it, but not that often. Because if I do it every session, it tends to be like mostly the same answers. But if I ask it like every other or every 3, then I tend to get different answers. So, because it's a lot of like, well, what went well? Well, yeah, the campaign was fun. We liked the combat. Like the next session, like it's the same thing. But if they have like a little bit more difference between the environment and the time I ask him, then I kind of get some semi-different answers. I realized. So, yeah, I do use stars and wishes.
But I do tend to get a good amount of like, combat was fun, great, cool. That's helpful, sort of. But
yeah, right. Yeah.
If I'm doing it every week, then it's like it could be better. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. It's like I find that asking more direct questions like, how did you guys feel about this thing? Especially if it's like a new mechanic that I tried, I might get some different answers that way. But then that's also kind of goes back to like, okay, like, is this something I should ask openly, or would a feedback survey maybe be better? And also when you ask them, if you ask them at the end of the session, they just want to like go relax and kind of like stop playing. So maybe like mid game might be like a better time to ask potentially. Yeah, no, those are good.
Point.
Yeah, like
Do you have you done mid game before? Because usually I think like with mid game, they're still focused in the game and trying to get this thing. Usually at the end, I know they want to go home, but you're just like, or they want to hang and chat and just not think too hard. Yep. In which case, I always thought that's a good time to ask. Just be like, hey, what'd you guys think of this thing? Oh yeah. Well, blah blah blah. You know, and that. But you find mid game?
Ever since I introduced the Lore Master, the two problems developed. The first problem is that yes, it's easier to make notes. But if we do it at the end of the game, they just don't want to do it, and they just like don't put any effort in making notes, which is like, I made it easier for you guys for a reason, but now it's like too easy. So I have them do notes at the middle, and then like 15 minutes before our session ends, we start doing notes again. And then during that time, I like also ask questions of like, how did you guys feel about this or that? And then we like split up doing the notes, if anything. But then the second problem that I've had with the Lore Master is that they oftentimes don't know anything of the lore because it's not somewhere that, like in Foundry that they see it. So I have to ask them questions about lore at the beginning of every session. So that way it's like, well, what is the answer to this question? And if you answer it correctly, I give you this reward. And like 10% of them will get them right. But it's like things that I expect that they wouldn't remember or know. I try to like just bring it back in the front of their mind so they don't forget. Those are the two things that are like kind of the downsides to the Lore Master. It's an external device, but if you don't study it, you kind of don't retain it. Yeah.
So so your players kind of, you have it, it's there, and they did the thing where they're like, oh, it's written down. I'm not going to think about it anymore at all until next time.
Yeah. But then but then it's like whenever it becomes useful in the game, they don't go to check it or don't remember stuff, which is, it's natural. It's been 7 days since last time we played. But if they're not handwriting it down, because handwriting is like the highest amount they remember stuff, then it becomes harder to remember unless it's like repeatedly brought up to them some way or the other. Let's see. So the next part, maintaining world consistency, is honestly, that just kind of comes down to just making sure that your organization, whatever method that you use, is consistent, and also they're referring back to it and also referring it to the players as well. That's the part that this part that I was talking about. That includes anything: timeline, NPCs, changes in the world, environmental evolution. As you kind of find is that over time, especially if you had the same dungeon done 5 times, you might have like different iterations of the dungeon in your mind. It kind of starts to like mix together. So having like things set up where you can have like a log related to locations or NPCs helps a lot, I found. So that is good. Rumor systems, same thing. Like knowing which rumors that you disperse to them and knowing which rumors are true versus invalid, because then it starts to kind of mesh together at some point. Same thing with like consequences and like keeping track of like what actions were done versus what consequences versus what changes. I had a time where I remember very clearly they set a library on fire with a fireball, and then I never changed the library for like a month, and then I was like, oh, that's right, this place was burned down. But if I had done that change earlier, then it would have been a lot more dynamic. But it's more like me as a DM, I didn't write it down. I had so many other things to think about, I forgot about it. So sometimes continuity just kind of falls through the cracks. And so that's whenever things like knowing when to retcon and knowing when to and how retconning occurs is something to kind of let the players know, but also kind of keeping them in the loop of like how would they prefer things to kind of like be retcon helps a lot, because there's so many more of them. If you retcon in a certain way, it might be good for some players, but then other players might hate it to the point they leave. So that's a part where like that could be kind of iffy, like you're stepping on toes at that point. Let's see, what else? Consistency, player facing documents, we already talked about that. Community contributions. So we talked about the player created content, where you making templates and having the players be able to fill those out. Other things that I've seen is that modern day we tend to kind of lean towards story and backstory a lot. So having a backstory like template to give to players so that they know what to fill out helps, so that way you don't have someone make 12 pages of stuff and then one person only gives you like 2 sentences. That's a very different dynamic. Being very specific about what it is they have to make at most and at minimum helps a lot. Like a lot. So that way you can kind of like really keep it tight on some people not putting too much and some people not putting too little. You kind of have like a balance. Let's see. There's times with like sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just laughing, just the page assignment when the teacher comes in, they're like, I want 2 pages tomorrow.
Yeah, it's true.
Adrian, the 35-page paper is not needed. I know you like sci-fi, but it's going to be 2 pages.
It's true. I mean, I have in the early days of the West March, I had one person give me a 6-page backstory, and then the other person, it was like, what does your player like? Hot dogs. Okay, like 1-word answers.
Yeah, thanks. Hot dogs, awesome.
So, community stuff. So the more, like, West March is pretty much a community. So the more you can have them engage with each other as opposed to with you, the better. And one of those things there's times where there were so many different events that occurred. I'm just like, I don't know what you guys want. I don't know. So how do you solve that? So something I've done is I've made like community world building sessions where I would make it open invite, anyone can come. And we, at that point, make a consensus of establishing key decisions and what we kind of care about the most. Sometimes I don't know. Sometimes, like, even though they kind of decided to do something, it doesn't mean that they necessarily care about the outcome. It's just that maybe they just had no other choice but to do that thing in the moment, right? Doesn't mean that they care. They're just trying to get through the situation. But it could have been maybe they cared about something else that's more on the side, right? And so sometimes that vagueness, especially when you kind of see like a mismatch of like, I'm getting mixed signals. That's like a good time to kind of have people come together, because if you continue forward in that uncertainty, people pick it up, and then it starts to like be a lot harder to kind of keep people together. So that's whenever you kind of tend to see more drop off.
So with these world building sessions, are these actually like the building of the world, like a microscope type of a thing, or is it more like what kind of more of a vague, like getting the feeling of the types of aspects they want the world that you're going to create for them?
Last time I did one, it was whenever they found so they had to find a place to live, was one of the first major things that I gave them. And they made a base, but even though they were considered a faction and in this one spot, they had different goals on what they wanted to do And so you would have some groups that are like doing this general thing over here, but it didn't have anything to do with what this other group was doing. So there was like no correlation going across the board. And so I had to sit them down and be like, okay, guys, like, I think we need to figure out a general means of what it is that your faction, your base is more or less wanting to do, because I'm over here preparing like 3 different types of content and it's not sustainable. And so, and they could continue in that way. Let's say that I could keep up with the content creation. Then what would happen is that they would have splits. They would split their group in 3s. They would have 3 different West Marches at that point, where they're just going and they just kind of keep going, and then they just get to a point where there's just no more connection. So that's the time that I did it. But it was like very much I think it was very micro and macro. Like they had to decide and also get rid of some things, and kind of had to come to some sort of consensus of what they wanted to do, even though maybe not everyone wanted to do it. But that's kind of like what happens when you have so many people. You have different interests, but you can't do everything. Yeah. Hopefully that kind of answered your question. That's a very tough situation to kind of put people into.
I see. Yeah, because it kind of the fun part of the world building piece is cool, except for when you start having people who want very different things, and then yeah, I can see where the numbers and quantity, like, yeah, because I know a game of Microscope, the way that works, it's the specific world building, and
yeah,
you know, so once the worlds get you can try and destroy a player's thing, but that's just a different era, and so you just kind of like it. All of that, even conflict, kind of builds a world. But if you have people that are like, "What is our base about?" You got to kind of majority rules it. I understand that.
Yep, that game was made by the same person that invented the West Marches style, Ben Robbins.
Oh, is Ben Robbins? Yeah.
Yeah. Ben Robbins. Yeah. You know, if you haven't had a chance to read, I would read through his things on West Marches, because he explains how he did it, and it's really interesting. The way that he organized his, I was like, oh yeah, I wouldn't do it exactly like that, but it's some good reference material in there on how to run stuff. Also, some other articles that he's put out helps out a lot. That's where I got some of my notes from. Let's see. So aside from that, I'm looking at the rest of my notes to see what else. Other things that you could do, like crediting people, having a process for how to review player-given content helps a lot. Recognition. Sometimes some people need a little bit development on skills, especially if players are new. So maybe having some some skill building sessions on like, how do you make a more immersive character helps. Things that kind of like keep people growing together, that like, even if it has nothing to do with the game directly, those kind of things still kind of help your West Marches, because then it kind of shows a lot more investment that they're trying to keep this group together to some remark. So sometimes it has nothing to do with the game at all. Like having hangout sessions also helps out immensely as well, even though it has nothing to do with the game. And so like we had a couple of things like that, just kind of like catching up was one like event that we have like once a month, where we just set a day and time to catch up on life, and then players kind of like form that connection, and then it's nice because then I get to see them forming relationships with each other, and that strengthens the bond of the entire West March. Community challenges are good. Like setting a challenge of like, you must kill 100 slimes to get this specific thing in this amount of time. That kind of helps. Having seasonal events also helps too for engagement. I would definitely do seasonal stuff. Maybe as simple as like maybe changing the image of the Discord like page to like just have a more seasonal layer helps a lot, because it kind of shows and it feels like a different like small event. Like I remember whenever my work used to change stuff for Christmas and Halloween when I worked in the hospital before, and it did make it feel kind of like homey, like people kind of cared about what it is that's going on and trying to like make things just different, so that way there's like a sense of like home in it, right? And that's everything for the first pillar. Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to make these sessions just like one pillar at a time, because that was a lot of stuff, right? I didn't know how far I was gonna get.
That was great. I was just about to say that I gotta run here in a minute, but I'm glad I could stick around for most stuff there.
Absolutely. Then if you want to know the instructions, so like for the interactive part, I put a lot of templates there for you guys to go through. and you basically just delete the stuff that you don't want to add to your Westmarch. So like you're making your regional template. Okay, so what from this do I want to keep? You just delete stuff that you don't want to keep. I wouldn't keep all of it. I would keep like maybe 40-50% of it, but going through it, kind of making your base template for all of your different parts of the game, and then starting to make the expansion for your game.